in another example of agency engagement, Commissioner Truex, you were in Washington last for your trip related to flood insurance, but we did take time to have a meeting with FEMA related to Knight Island FEMA reimbursement, which is still an outstanding issue. FEMA is interpreting a sort of a fact sheet that they have on reimbursement for damages in a way that is detrimental to us and we believe is an incorrect interpretation of the fact sheet. So we went and had a very high-level meeting with personnel at FEMA in hopes of working to resolve that issue. So again, those are just some examples of some of the things that we do beyond this legislative agenda that do have a tangible, valuable impact to the county. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions on the agenda or other activities.
Yeah, I've got some comments, but I'm going to start off with my colleague, Commissioner Constance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, Greg, I appreciate you delaying your visit down here for exactly the reasons that you brought up. I think we were very preoccupied with some other things, so I don't view it as being late to the dance. I look at it as being fashionably late, so that's good. And I think you're exactly right with some of your comments with regard to Congress. It actually does get some things accomplished, and the scary part is that sometimes they need to be undone, and that's exactly what happened with the bigger waters, to the point where one of the originators of the legislation didn't realize that flood maps were going to be revised at the same exact time as her legislation was going to come into existence and into being enforced. And that's just a lack of communication between, again, the agencies and the legislature. But I think what we did prove is when a piece of important information gets brought and enough citizens get vocal and legislators decide, hey, this is something we really need to work on, and we disseminate that information to our Florida Association of Counties and get all the other counties involved, and it culminates in 1 year later or 11 months later having such a push that we get 310 votes to amend a very flawed piece of legislation. That's when you see that things actually do get done, but they've got to be sort of a critical issue before that happens. You and I yesterday discussed the fact that in regard to the Restore Act, one of the things that really burdens my mind with regard to the spill is the ecological nightmare that's occurring at the bottom of the Gulf with regard to all the dispersants that were used, and we have all these toxic chemicals that are heavier than water sitting at the bottom. And there have been scientific studies and surveys being done of the fish, and there definitely is an increase in the mutation rate and tumors and things. And so I'm very, very concerned that while we only really, the state of Florida controls maybe 10 miles off our coast, that we need to involve NERDA and really look at some other avenue to make sure that the federal government's aware that it's not just the Restore Act that's going to take care of this, but they can't shut the door on the NERDA issue. So I want to make sure that we continue that dialogue and find out if the agency has to be briefed in any way to make them aware, and if we need our local scientific community, of which there's a fairly broad spectrum up and down the coast that's doing research, and hopefully some of it's being funded by BP dollars, but that they can get that very important information organized, centralized, and disseminated to the people that need to see it. I'm looking at some of these other things now. The Knights Island, is that the same issue, Jason, that you and I were talking with them about the year prior with regard to accretion and erosion, and how they're trying to set the formula up a certain way and say, well, it's just an average, and it's not. You have to look at each specific area, and it involves resources either way that you look at it. Is that the same?
That's part of it. That's the issue that we continue to deal with, and that Greg referred to, in which we held a meeting a few weeks ago. Also, what's in our agenda is to identify possible funding sources for the 10-year management plan that we're currently undergoing. That's the main issue that's actually encompassed in the agenda, because we hope to have the other FEMA public assistance funding issue resolved shortly.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Truex, I appreciate you staying on top of that. Offshore energy exploration, I'm glad you brought that forward, because I got a feeling that's going to be something that's going to be hot for the next year now, that we're, this is one of those ticklers that you've given us. And I think, I want to say I really appreciate you, Greg, and your firm being so on top of things. You know, one of the other items I want to discuss is the, you brought up the Tiger 4, and I'm glad you did, and that was going to be my direction, is get with Tom Patton and help him out, because he's hot on moving this forward, and I think we actually do have a shot at it, since we've missed out on the first three, and this is something that hits on a lot of cylinders that, you know, maybe we will get some funding to help with that road. But the other thing is, while we were up there last year, the sequestration was hitting, and the problem was that our control tower was not going to be funded at the airport. Well, that since has occurred, and we've got funding for this year, but as we discussed in my office yesterday, that's just this year, and every year we got to come back to the table and make sure that we can get funding. So even though you essentially work for us and not the airport authority, it's still our airport, and it's still something that's very much on the top of our minds, and so we're supporting our colleagues at the airport by making sure that you're staying on top of that and keeping us informed. And if there's anything we can do, you know, in talking to our congressman or anything else, we need to know that so we can move the item forward.
Yeah, and you're right that the airport issue is one that I didn't mention, but is very critical. I mean, the funding that was restored for these contract air towers is really a temporary fix. And the problem is that this has now become something that's up in the air, whereas before it was just a given that they would always have their funding. But now that that's, you know, been put in question, you know, there's going to have to be an annual effort in order to keep funding for that program in the budget. It's not going to be easy.
Right, and to say that that's critical for us is a tremendous understatement. We have been seeing record passenger levels coming through that airport. I mean, beyond anybody's wildest dreams. And what we don't want to do is have a misstep, which has occurred at other local airports like Sarasota, where they were booming, and then they made some changes, and they've never come back, and it's been 10 years. And so we're taking that volume now, and we don't want to see that happen. So thank you for staying on top of those things.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Duffy.
Thank you. Many of these are very, very interesting and important issues, but the one that really got my attention is this, Waters of the United States. And we have people in this audience that might want to pay particular attention to this, because we may need your help. We need the citizens' help on this one. This is federal legislation where the EPA has a proposed rule on waters of the U.S. This is an issue that could lead to unrealistic and overburdensome regulations that could negatively affect Charlotte County. In my opinion, this is a perfect example of significant government outreach. And all of this information is attached to our agenda today. It's online if anybody would like to read it. But if you go to the section in our agenda that talks about waters of the United States, it explains how it could affect Charlotte County. It talks about all water bodies would be subject to federal jurisdiction on a case-by-case review, and it would affect water treatment systems, and I'm not reading the whole list, but artificial lakes or ponds created by excavation, artificial reflecting or swimming pools, small ornamental waters created in dry land, water-filled depressions incidental to construction, groundwater drained through subsurface drainage systems. That sounds like drain fields. Gullies, rills, non-wetland swales, and puddles. Ditches excavated entirely in upland areas, and ditches that do not contribute flow to otherwise jurisdictional waters. That means that the federal government would then maintain control over just about all waters in the state of Florida. And it could have significant financial impact on property owners, businesses, any future development, and counties. Every time we do a road project and we do a retention pond, or that would be affected, and we would have to be subject to federal government review. I think this is something we really have to jump on the bandwagon and ask the citizens to pay attention to this. And I think we should make it available on our website that gives our citizens the names and addresses of all of our members of Congress and the Senate, just to let them know. It hasn't actually gone to them for a vote yet, but but it's working through committees, Greg, did you tell me?
Well, it's a federal rulemaking proceeding, so
Right.
technically it actually does not go to Congress at all or the Senate at this point. However, Congress could insert themselves into the process by denying funding to the agencies for these activities. So there could be a legislative angle, absolutely. I think your point is a good one. No, a couple things I would mention is, beyond the legislators, certainly we could let folks know how to make comments on the rule to the agencies.
Right.
The rule has yet to be published in the Federal Register. This is the EPA and the Corps, however, have made it publicly available. I would note that the information that's provided in this agenda, I think that we wrote this back in, it actually says January on the date, but I think it was more like February or March, and I can't recall which. So we've now seen the proposed rule. At the time, we were looking at a leaked version that had come out towards the end of last year. So there are some things that have changed minorly, in a minor way, but that said, I think that the intent of the rule is still the same, and we do have a lot of concerns. But we're going to really work through the details, and certainly, I can work with your staff to make sure that members of the public have an easily accessible way to comment if they should.
And of course, as a county, as a commission, I think our goal is to protect the environment in a reasonable way. This, to me, is over the top. This is over government regulation. And I noticed lately that Punta Gorda, the city council, has really made a big push to the citizens to one of their issues with their RO plant, to ask them to please write letters, write emails, make phone calls, and let these agencies know that we're not happy about what they're trying to do to us. So if we could put it on our website in a place that's easily accessible for our citizens with an explanation and maybe a link that takes them right to this, that gives them more information, and then we as a commission could probably do a letter, if everyone agrees, and send it to whatever agencies would be appropriate on that. Thank you.
Commissioner Duffy, we do currently, under the Commission Office, we've included a legislative link. We've just done this within the past couple of weeks. And under that, we have the Waters of the U.S. topic where you can click on that. The summaries that Greg has been providing that outline and include the details of the proposed rule are attached there. And we will add information on how to contact our legislators and the agencies. Once the rule is actually published, the draft rule, we'll also put that there and any other pertinent information.
That's great. Thank you very much.
I'm going to weigh in on this one right now. Conceptually, I'm kind of developing a strategy in my mind. This is, in fact, I agree with Commissioner Duffy, an enormously potentially will have adverse impacts to not only Charlotte County and the entire state of Florida. With EPA and the Corps expanding their jurisdictional boundaries by this proposed rule, which we haven't seen the details of it yet, but know enough about it to know that it could be catastrophic, even I guess potentially worse than the flood insurance program in certain aspects as far as economic development and getting construction projects underway. I've got a lot of experience across the country with these particular permits. What I would suggest, and I think it would be a good effort, that we encourage staff to take and develop some conceptual maps that show current EPA and Corps jurisdiction. It could be big overall maps that sort of show the limits of where they have jurisdiction today. And then once we look at the new rule, kind of take those maps and show what the jurisdictional limits will be if this rule is passed. A visual aid will help the people in Washington, Tallahassee, everywhere, understanding. And I would certainly volunteer with my background to help educate everybody anywhere as to how adverse this will be to us. And then I think we can plug in and get the masses involved with communicating to whoever needs to be communicated to. Commissioner Constance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner Duffy, I'm really glad you brought this up. And, I just want people to understand the background behind this, because it says a series of decisions by the U.S. Supreme Court over the past decade imposed restrictions on the scope of wetland regulations governed by Section 404 of the Clean Water Act that regulated dredge and fill activities in navigable waters and their adjacent wetlands. Opponents of these restrictions have urged Congress to redefine waters of the U.S. and apply that definition to all aspects of the Clean Water Act.